How many of you were present on this earth when LBJ was president? A few minutes ago here. Do you happen to remember a man by the name of Bill Moyers, who was his press secretary? And not only was he a press secretary, but he was also a Baptist minister from Texas, and so he just fit that role perfectly for LBJ. And on one occasion, one of the early years or early days, Bill Moyers, was asked by the president at a dinner, at a very important state dinner, whether Bill would pray. And Bill said, of course. And he started to pray in LBJ's fashion, who knew no end to the lack of etiquette. He said, Bill, he said, I can't hear you. And Bill said, with all due respect, Mr. President, I'm not speaking to you. That is the central focus of this chapter. We need to remember, we need to know that we are to pray to God. You see, it's so often that we run away with our own fears and our own thoughts and our own activities that we forget that the focus and center of the whole matter is God Himself. When we pray, we are to focus on who He is. When we pray, we are to praise Him for who and what He has done. You see, it's important for us to always keep that in mind. If we walk away from here saying to ourselves, oh, that was a nice prayer, let's consult God before we make that kind of judgment. The central focus of your life and my life in prayer must be our Lord and Savior. And once we recognize that, all other things will fall into place. And important in this particular text that I read to you already is the section or the petition where it says, your kingdom come, your will be done. And then it says, give us today our daily bread. Give us today our daily bread. Why is that important? It's important for a lot of reasons, because you see, in a very real sense, you and I can get caught up in thinking that we can provide the bread ourselves. And when yet we know, and we are told in so many different ways, in so many different places, that we are not the breadwinners. Now we've incorporated that into our life, into our language, but you and I are not the breadwinners. God is the breadwinner, and He's willing to share that with us. You see, He wants to take care of us, even though we so often push Him away because we don't want anything to do with Him, because He hasn't answered our last prayer, because we're afraid that God may demand something from us in return from the bread. It's very important for us to also recognize that this particular passage in the Lord's Prayer is in the context of a very important theme in Scripture, and that is greed. It talks about you cannot serve money and God. And I bet you every one of us in this congregation has at one time or another tried to do exactly that. To serve Him both. But you see, it doesn't say you shouldn't serve Him. It says you cannot. And the reason we cannot is because we are divided. If we are divided in our loyalties, if we are divided in focusing on what is important, we will always give God the short shrift. As long as you and I think we can do it on our own, we'll be happy with that. In fact, what is it? We just think it's wonderful for us to be self-made men and women. And God tells us again and again that we are not self-made. That God created us, and God saved us, and God will direct us, and God will protect us. In all sorts of ways. Even when we face surgeries, even when we face death, there is nothing that can separate us. So that's greed. But what's greed? There's a wonderful example about greed and what greed is all about. It comes from the Eskimos. You might have heard that before. I know I used it one time in a sermon before, but since most people don't remember my sermon, I don't even remember my sermons, so I figure I can use it again. And the example is of an Eskimos, the way they catch wolves. The way they catch wolves is they will take their knife and they will stick it in the tundra so it's standing straight up. And the blade is on top, and they cover the blade with blood, and because it's so cold there, the blood freezes almost immediately. And they do again, layer after layer after layer, and then they go away and watch. And a wolf will come. And a wolf will start licking the blood on the blade. Licking the blood on the blade. Licking again and again and again until the wolf bites his own tongue or cuts his own tongue with a knife. And then the wolf keeps on licking and licking until the blood is all gone. That's greed. Now that's an awful example, isn't it? I mean, Rhonda just looked at me and she said, "Whoa, my goodness, I didn't come to hear that." And I don't blame you. It's an awful thing. And yet, we need to recognize that God is the only one who can actually save and direct us and be our Lord and Savior. So the context then of prayer is that there is greed here, but there's not just a concern about greed, and there's not just the idea that the Lord's Prayer exists in some ways to help us put our greed in perspective. Because you see, if we depend daily on God's bread, we can't be greedy. You see, the point here is not just about bread, the point is also about all aspects of our lives where we think that we can handle those ourselves, when in fact we cannot. When we are greedy for recognition or all sorts of other things that we could raise or mention in our own privacy. But there's more, isn't there? There's also worry. Did you hear it again and again? In fact, there are 6 different references in this text to do not worry. Do not worry. Do not worry. Do not worry. But Lord, you are not facing the situation that I'm in. That may be true. But do not worry. Because I'm in control. And if we are really grapple with it or struggling with this whole notion of what it means not to worry, I think it's important for us to recall or remember what Timothy Keller, who was a Presbyterian pastor in the Redeemer Presbyterian Church in Manhattan, recently retired, actually just took another position. He founded that church. And one of the things he said, when I have prayed, and I pray, and God doesn't seem to be answering either at all or the way he wants or I want him to answer, he says, I stop and I ask myself, if I knew what God knows, wouldn't I want the same decision? Isn't it often true that the reason we worry is because we really don't know what God knows? And so we worry about our lives, we worry about our occupations, we worry about our friends, we worry about our neighbors. And often the concern that we have is fine. But when it becomes a worry, it becomes something that gnaws at us, something that takes over our lives and has a tendency to control us from the beginning to the end. And God says, if you really trust me, if you really believe that I will provide bread, I will provide the means for you to live, I will provide health in your family, if you really believe that, that doesn't mean it's going to happen. But it does mean that we can put aside greed, and it does mean that we can put aside the worry that exists in our lives. But we need to do it again and again. Our daily bread. Give us this day our daily bread. It's interesting, isn't it? Because it actually is praying that give us today the bread that we need tomorrow. Give us today the bread that we need tomorrow. But as it states in Exodus chapter 16, God provided manna and provided quail for the children of Israel. But you know what's interesting? They wanted to hoard it. They wanted to stockpile. They wanted to make sure that they had some tomorrow. They demonstrated their lack of trust because they stockpiled the manna and the quail, and what happened? It became putrid. It became stinky. What is it? What are those little white bugs? Can't think of the word. Maggots. So the next time you try to get your bank account bigger, look at the financial maggots that you might be growing. So how do we deal with this? How do we look at this? There's a story by the name of Leo Tolstoy. How much land is enough? Is the title of the story. And it consists of a man, a peasant farmer in Russia, who is very wealthy and very well-to-do, but he cannot get enough. Cannot get enough. He always wants more. And one of his neighbors, who's also wealthy, comes to him and says, I have a proposition for you. And my proposition is that if you this morning, or tomorrow morning, start off running, or whatever you want to do, all the land that you cover by sundown will be yours. I thought that's easy to manage. All the land that I cover will be mine. And the guy says, yes. He says, but there's one condition. You must end up where you began. And so the man took off the next morning, running as fast as he could, getting as far away from the starting point because he could make a larger arc or a larger square or whatever. And by 12 o'clock he was getting exhausted, but he wanted to go farther and farther. And by 3 o'clock he realized that if he didn't run right now, he would never be able to get back to the spot where he started. And so he put everything into it that he could. Everything. All his energy, all his focus, all his drive went into covering as much area and to get back to that point. And he started running and he became exhausted. And as he came closer and closer to the point, he had a heart attack and died. The people buried him, his servants, in a grave that was 6 feet long, 6 foot deep, 3 feet wide. Tolstoy raises the question with the title of the short story. How much does a man need? How much land does a man